Welcome back to the most unprofessional sports channel on YouTube. Welcome back to Swivel Chair Sports. I'm your host, Zach Zuckerberg. Here with the host today, Aaron. Go and say hi, Aaron.
Hi, if you like our content, be sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment. Let us know what you think.
But other than that, let's go ahead and get into it. So in this video, we'll be continuing our off-season grading series. The first two videos, we went over the AFC and NFC Wests. In this video, we'll be going over the NFC North, talking about the Bears, Lions, Packers, and Vikings. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the Chicago Bears. So the Bears this offseason, obviously kind of a major overhaul of their roster, taking that next big step in this rebuilding process that they've been going through for the last few years now. As far as major losses go, obviously sending Justin Fields up to Pittsburgh, not getting a whole lot in return for him. I know they were kind of hoping for more, but did end up getting him out of the building in order to make room for their new quarterback of the future. Outside of Justin Fields, I don't think they really lost a ton that I can think of as far as like notable names that made a ton of impact on the team. I think they were really trying to kind of turn the roster around with a bunch of new additions this offseason. And in doing so, you know, they brought in a bunch of experience in the secondary. Well, one guy in the secondary and Kevin Byard, and then two offensive guys in DeAndre Swift at running back, and then Gerald Everett at the tight end position, bringing in some veteran guys for those respective positions to hopefully kind of bring some leadership to a locker room with a lot of young talent right now. And then as along with those additions, they also traded for Keenan Allen, only giving up a fourth-round pick in that trade, which I think was kind of a little less than we all expected. However, he is just a one-year rental, so we'll have to wait and see what their plans are for him in the future, whether or not they plan on extending him or if it's just the 1 year and let the young guys take over. Yeah, after that, really the most of their notable additions came in the draft, obviously. Number one overall pick, Caleb Williams, the consensus number one pick going into the draft this year. Some mixed opinions on him throughout the internet community, but most analysts seem to agree that he's going to be the next big thing in the NFL. So we'll have to see what, you know, the future holds for him, obviously, as the franchise guy for the Chicago Bears. And then along with him in the first round, they also picked up wide receiver Rome Odunze out of the University of Washington to, help add more talent to an increasingly stacked receiving room that, as mentioned before, added Keenan Allen this offseason. Last offseason added DJ Moore. So setting Caleb Williams up for success seemingly by bringing in another guy like Rome Odunze alongside those two. And then after that, later in the draft, they were able to take tackle Kyron Amagaji in the third round out of Yale. So definitely a developmental project there from what I've seen. But, you know, the Bears could use more talent on the offensive line, so hopefully he can develop into something special for them at that position. And then after that, in the fifth round, they also took edge rusher Austin Booker out of Kansas, who big dude, 6'6", 245 pounds. So if he can develop into a good edge rusher there in Chicago, I mean, that defense is going to be scary with him and Sweat on the other end. So what are your thoughts on the Chicago Bears offseason?
They made the moves that they think they needed, starting with that Justin Fields deal. Really kind of making the decision to kind of switch directions franchise-wise and go with Caleb Williams in the draft. And then doing what they didn't do with Justin Fields, getting him weapons, brought in Keenan Allen, like you said, Rome Odunze, DeAndre Swift, who had a good season last year with the Lions, and then Kevin Byard on the move yet again. Good veteran presence, and then Gerald Everett to kind of go on the compliment Cole Kmet. So
Yeah.
I really like what they did. Seems like a sort of philosophical shift for the Bears.
I agree. They definitely. It feels like they added a ton of offensive talent this offseason, and with a team whose defense was already pretty solid, I think that was definitely the right move to go. Obviously, they had much to be desired on the offensive side of the football. So adding guys like Caleb Williams, Rome Odunze in the draft, and then Swift and Everett through free agency, as well as trading for Keenan Allen, I think is just gonna make that offense completely different. It's gonna completely, like you said, shift the philosophy that team I think's run on. So with that all being said, I mean, I don't know if you could have asked for a better offseason out of Chicago. I know there's a ton of, criticism people throw at Caleb Williams, but I do think he's going to be a great quarterback. And with the talent that they have around him this year, I think it may be as soon as this next season. I expect him to win Rookie of the Year. And I don't know if they're good enough to flirt with the playoffs, but with all that being said, I do think they had an A, maybe even, I'll stick at A, but it's right on the edge of A+ for me. I think the Bears had almost a perfect offseason.
Yeah, I agree. I'd give them an A. I think it's probably almost impossible to get an A+. You got to bring in some, I think, big free agents, have home runs, multiple home runs in the draft. But yeah, I think I'd lean A.
Yeah, no, I mean they did exactly what they needed to do, at least on paper. That has to be, prefaced. It is all on paper at this point. We haven't seen them play any games, but it seems like they're set up for success down the line, and they took a huge step this offseason. So, moving on to the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions last year had a hell of a run, made it all the way to the conference championship game where they fell up just short against the San Francisco 49ers after building a pretty good sized lead, just letting that slip away in the second half. But outside of that, it was a great season for them, a huge step forward as a franchise, and this offseason they were going into it looking to continue to improve, a pretty successful team. Did have a couple big losses, notably C.J. Gardner-Johnson, cornerback, went back to Philadelphia. He was a big heart and soul type of player on the defensive side of the football for them last year. Really brought a tough culture to a team that was already kind of heading that way. So it could kind of be more of a mental thing losing him. But as far as on-field production, I think he's fairly easy to replace, being a probably slightly above average secondary player. Jonah Jackson was another big loss. Great lineman, went over to the Rams, I believe, and tough for them. Jared Goff is most successful when you can keep him clean. So losing a guy of Jonah Jackson's caliber is kind of tough. But once again, a position that's not super irreplaceable. It's not like they lost a tackle. He is a guard after all. A little easier to replace those interior guys as opposed to those outside linemen. And then outside of that, didn't really lose a ton, but they did end up signing Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Penei Sewell, all three to massive extensions, keeping those three guys around for the foreseeable future. So while they did lose a guard in Jonah Jackson, they were able to retain another great lineman in Penei Sewell and keep him around for a long time now. And then obviously Amon-Ra St. Brown becoming one of the better receivers in the league. And then Jared Goff, who may or may not, I think it might be safe to say he's the answer for the Lions at quarterback, at least for the next 4 or 5 years. That was a big question, I think, going into this past year, but I think their playoff run kind of answered some of those. So he got that big payday this offseason as well. And then as far as new guys to the team, they did bring in a lot of new talent. Notably through free agency, brought in defensive tackle DJ Reader out of Cincinnati. Big loss for Cincinnati, big gain for Detroit to just, further beef up that front seven that's already been kind of scary with Aiden Hutchinson running the place. Along with him, also brought in cornerback Carlton Davis to hopefully improve a slightly weak secondary. They could have, that was probably, if you had to point to a spot on the defense, that was maybe their weak point. I think their secondary might have been it. And that's why they also addressed some of those concerns in the draft that we'll get to in a second. But Carlton Davis, good pickup as well. Marcus Davenport, edge rusher, also a big pickup for them. I think they could use a guy across the other side of Aiden Hutchinson to help, bring pressure to opposing quarterbacks. So adding him and DJ Reader in the same offseason I think is huge for that front seven of Detroit. And then also adding Kevin Zeitler through free agency to kind of replace that production they may be losing in Jonah Jackson. Kevin Zeitler obviously been pretty successful throughout his career as far as guards go. So I think that's a pretty good addition considering you lost a guy of Jonah Jackson's caliber. And then as far as the draft goes, spent a couple of picks, notably their first round pick on Terrion Arnold, a guy that some mock drafts had as the number one cornerback in the draft. So obviously a great talent there that you're bringing in to improve that secondary alongside another draft pick in the second round, Ennis Rakestraw out of Missouri, who I know we're both high on, but to be fair, we are Missouri fans, so there might be a little bias there. And then after that, brought in, Makai Wingo, interior defensive guy in the 6th round out of LSU, who, in my opinion, was a little bit slept on. I know a lot of people were expecting him to go later in the draft, but I think his talent was deserving of maybe like at least a day 2 pick. So I was surprised to see him fall to the 6th round just out of potential alone. But yeah, what are your kind of thoughts on the Lions offseason? I think they had a pretty good one, all things considered.
Yeah, lots of secondary moves, which was much needed. I mean, Amik Robertson, he caused problems for the Chiefs last year, so good to see him leave and go to a different different conference, different division. And then Terrion Arnold, one of the best prospects on the defensive side of the ball in this draft. You kind of talked about Ennis Rakestraw. And then DJ Reader, put him on the same side as, Marcus Davenport or Aiden Hutchinson. That's going to be nightmare for an offensive line to deal with.
Those three in the front is insane. That's really scary.
For a team that didn't have a lot of holes to begin with coming into this offseason, they did a good job of filling the ones they had to and really adding to some of the spots where they already had a lot of talent.
Yeah, and I think we're going to end up probably rating all of these teams in this division fairly high, because I think it'll be interesting to see what we say about the next 2 teams, but the Lions I also have probably, I don't know if I'll have them as quite as an A, but I'll give them an A-, because I think, like you said, the holes that they did have in the secondary, they filled with really good players in Terrion Arnold, Ennis Rakestraw, Carlton Davis, and then bringing in Marcus Davenport and DJ Reader to go alongside Aiden Hutchinson is just terrifying. So, and then I love the Makai Wingo pick late in the draft. I thought that was beautiful. So, and then along with the extensions of Amon-Ra St. Brown, Penei Sewell, and even Jared Goff, I think they just killed it this offseason. So.
Yeah, and bringing in Donovan Peoples-Jones to kind of help Amon-Ra St. Brown, another big addition during free agency. So I think I'd lean, right around that A-, B+ range. I'd probably lean B+.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think this division is going to be really fun this next season. I think all 4 of these teams are going to be really competitive, specifically with each other. So I'm really excited to see what we have to say about these next 2 teams, who, honestly, compared to these first 2, because they did so well, and honestly, I mean, the amount of turnover, really more so just bringing the names they brought in, was so impressive that it's going to be interesting to see how these other 2 stack up. So moving on to the Green Bay Packers. Obviously, the Packers last year surprised some people, sneaking into the playoffs as a 7 seed, beat the Dallas Cowboys in the first round, becoming this first 7 seed to win a playoff game. I mean, as far as the potential of that team goes, specifically on the offensive side of the football, I think they're just now scraping the surface of what they could accomplish, because with Jordan Love and then that young receiver core that they have, I mean, I think the sky's the limit for that squad. But some losses that they did have to suffer through this offseason, losing John Runyon, guard, to the New York Giants, kind of tough right there. He's been a staple of that offensive line for a while now. And then package that with, I know he didn't play a whole lot because he wasn't healthy a whole lot, but losing Bakhtiari not too soon not too recently. Before that, two huge linemen like that's kind of a tough pill to swallow. Also losing safety Darnell Savage, which I don't think is a massive loss, mainly because of the addition that they made to hopefully replace him, that we'll talk about here in a little bit, but is a notable name that they let go or let walk this offseason. And then Aaron Jones, probably the biggest name that they lost, running back, been the staple of that side of the football for a while now, alongside Aaron Rodgers up until this last season. Kind of one of the last remaining guys from those Aaron Rodgers days walking out the door, going down to rival Minnesota, who we'll talk about them right after this. But yeah, I also don't think he was a massive loss because, as we go ahead and get into our additions now, Josh Jacobs, big signing they made this offseason. In my opinion, he's still capable of being a top 5 running back in the league. I think the only reason he had a rough start to last season was because he did sit out of training camp and all that, trying to get that contract extension from the Raiders that inevitably didn't come, and that's why he's in Green Bay. But the year before that, obviously, he led the league in rushing yards with an incredible season. So on an offense that I think is going to have a really good balance of pass and run, I think Josh Jacobs was a great addition, especially considering he's younger than Aaron Jones. And then replacing Darnell Savage, like I mentioned earlier, Xavier McKinney coming over from the New York Giants, I think was a great addition as well. They needed secondary help, and Xavier McKinney is one of the top half safeties in the league probably right now. So as far as free agency goes, I think they did pretty well. Compensated for the big losses they got by bringing in some other big names that you could argue may even be better than the guys they lost. And then in the draft, first round pick Jordan Morgan out of Arizona was a pretty solid pick there late in the first round, 25th overall. One of the first round caliber tackles. There was like 7 of them this year, so there was tons to pick from. Maybe not when the Packers were on the clock, but I think everything considered, Jordan Morgan's pretty good. I did kind of want them to go Graham Barton at that pick just to, solidify the interior of that offensive line. But Jordan Morgan coming in, I think, was a good pickup. And then after that, taking middle linebacker Edgerrin Cooper, who I think was a pretty solid grab. I think he was rated as one of the better middle linebackers in this draft. So to bring him in, I think was great. Javon Bullard, safety as well. To further beef up that secondary that kind of struggled for most of last season. I think the Packers did pretty well. I don't know if I'd quite put them on the Lions and Bears tiers, but I do think they did pretty solid this offseason. What do you think?
Yeah, not really the flash of, a quarterback or a receiver.
Sure.
Or like a super big name cornerback, but they did add Xavier McKinney, who you mentioned. And Josh Jacobs, who are big veteran pickups that are solid players still. Brought back A.J. Dillon, who has a history there and knows kind of how things are run. And then, Jordan Morgan, I think, if I remember correctly, there still might have been some other more highly touted prospects available at tackle there, maybe 1 or 2, but Jordan Morgan, that's still a good pickup. That's kind of who I thought they would go with. And then seemingly revamping their middle linebacking core, picking up both Edgerrin Cooper and Tyron Hopper. Good pickups for them, going younger there, and then lots of secondary. So really kind of improving on the opposite side of the ball, which I think was a good decision considering how good their offense turned out later in the season.
Yeah, and like I said, that offense is so young. It's just going to continue to improve, I think, especially as those guys get more continuity together and more experience with each other. Because last year, I believe, was Jordan. Yeah, it was definitely Jordan Love's first season starting. So it was his first opportunity to really get to actually throw to those guys on a regular basis for the most part. And then I believe at least one of those guys was a rookie, and then their tight end was also a rookie. So that core is just going to continue to improve. So. I think all things considered.
I know a lot of Packers fans, if I remember correctly, wanted Cooper DeJean.
Yes.
But I think Jordan Morgan was probably the smarter pickup.
No, it was probably better to go lineman, especially like I mentioned earlier, losing Bakhtiari last year, I think. Or, I mean, shoot, he's been gone for basically the last 3 years with his injuries. And then losing John Runyon this offseason. They definitely needed to add some talent to that offensive line to help keep Jordan Love upright because that's going to be the key to that offense being successful. And Josh Jacobs being successful Josh Jacobs isn't going to be good if you can stack the box on it. That's what we've seen in Las Vegas the last couple of years, specifically last year. And that's why I think another reason he had a down year. But yeah, taking everything into account, Packers pretty solid offseason. Again, I don't think it's quite on the same level of the Lions and Bears, but it's pretty close. So I'll give them a solid B, borderline B plus, I think.
I think I'd lean B plus. Like I said, not a lot of flash, but they added what they needed to add. Yeah, B plus.
All right. Yeah, I think they're going to be probably atop the division this season. It's going to be between them and the Lions for sure. I think the Packers, depending on how much that offense improves, has a real good chance of winning it though. So it'll be fun to see. Like I said earlier, this division is going to be really exciting. So now moving on to our last team, we got the Minnesota Vikings. Obviously, the Vikings last year suffering through the Achilles injury of Kirk Cousins, and then bringing in Josh Dobbs, who had a good couple games and then fell back down to earth after being anointed as the Pastronaut, and then just a plethora of guys came in and out starting at quarterback after that due to injuries and poor play. And it was a really rough season for Vikings fans because they have the talent at the skill positions on the offensive side of the football. It really just came down to that Kirk Cousins injury last season that really kind of capsized the ship. And I mean, they didn't get off to a great start either. I believe they started off 0-4, so it was already a pretty wishy-washy season. But then once they got hot is when Kirk decided to, go and get hurt. So major losses this offseason. Kirk Cousins being a huge loss probably, but I mean, it was kind of inevitable that you were going to have to move on from him at some point. I believe I even said during the season that I was hoping they'd move on from him this year just because of Justin Jefferson's age and not wanting to waste his prime years. In my opinion, it's still a big loss, don't get me wrong, because he's Kirk freaking Cousins, but I do think it was time to part ways for both sides. And then huge loss on the defensive side, Danielle Hunter going down to Houston. However, they were able to replace him with a couple other edge rushers that can hopefully, replace some of the production they're going to lose with Danielle. But big loss for him. He was kind of like one of the leaders on the defensive side of the football, and the defensive side of the football was probably their weakest part last season and for the last few seasons now. I think they kind of want to revamp that defense, so this was kind of it hurts to lose him, but as we get into the additions, we can start with the guys they brought in to replace him. And Jonathan Grenard out of Houston, they kind of flipped edge rushers with the Texans, giving them Danielle and bringing in Jonathan. And then also bringing in Andrew Van Ginkel out of Miami, who I believe his season got cut short last year with injury. The loss of him was probably a big reason the Dolphins season ended as poorly as it did. So good talent on the defensive side of the football, good edge rusher alongside Jonathan Grenard should hopefully replace a lot of that production lost by Danielle Hunter. And then also signing quarterback Sam Darnold, who may or may not be the starter this next year. He's going to probably battle it out with rookie J.J. McCarthy, but if he does end up taking over as the starter, good veteran guy, I guess. I mean, he's cool, he's fine, he's seen a lot, he's been around the league a little bit now. New York, Carolina, San Francisco, now Minnesota. So he's been to every single corner of the United States at this point, so he's a traveling man, well-traveled. So, at the very least, he's going to be able to recommend some good sightseeing spots for J.J. McCarthy in these opposing cities. But moving on to the draft, J.J. McCarthy getting drafted number 10 overall, the second to last quarterback taken in the first round, and the fourth quarterback taken within the first 10 picks. I think we all kind of thought the Vikings were high on JJ McCarthy. I think a lot of people even speculated that they may trade up just to draft JJ McCarthy. No big surprise that they took him when he was available at 10. But after that, also scooping up edge rusher Dallas Turner out of Alabama, who I think was a great pickup. A lot of people considered him a potential top 10 talent, I think. So to get him at the 17th pick was a great value selection by the Vikings. Also scooping up cornerback Kyrie Jackson in the 4th round. We mentioned that their defense needed a lot of improvements. Their secondary could definitely use help, so hopefully Kyrie Jackson brings some much needed help to a secondary. But what do you think of the Vikings offseason? I mean, losing Kirk Cousins could hurt. Obviously, they probably took a slight step back quarterback-wise, but hopefully a slight step back to take a huge step forward maybe the next season. What do you think?
Yeah, the big story I think of this offseason for the Vikings was seemingly having to pick between Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson, who they were gonna extend and keep for the future. Obviously sticking with Justin Jefferson, probably planning on extending him
Yeah, I mean,
either later this season or next offseason. I think that's a smart decision, especially where they were in the draft, able to go up and get one of these highly touted prospect quarterbacks, taking JJ McCarthy and then bringing in the veteran presence of Sam Darnold to help sort of mentor him or even start this season, which makes a lot of sense to me. And then kind of some of the additions on defense. Their offense is obviously one of the better ones. Definitely was under Kirk Cousins. So I think they're just kind of looking to sort of maintain that. They didn't really lose anybody super important there. Brought in Aaron Jones, right? From the
yes,
Packers.
I forgot to mention that, but yes.
I think a lot of the positions they were looking to add were on defense this season or this offseason. So, and I think they did that.
Yeah, and then obviously also losing, who I forgot to mention earlier, Alexander Madison this offseason as well. But bringing in, like you said, Aaron Jones to replace that, I think was kind of a wash. Maybe even came out on top there because I think Aaron Jones still has a lot left in the tank. So with all that being said, I think they probably slightly above average. I think I'll give them a B-, just below the Packers, because they did take a step back this offseason. But like I said, it's not a step back for the foreseeable future. It's just taking a step back so that you can take a big step forward the following season. So what do you think? Hopefully, yeah. If everything works out.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think B- is a solid grade. Made the additions they needed to make. Nothing, super special, but they got the job done.
Yeah, and like I said at the beginning of the video, all 4 of these teams did a really, really good job this offseason. It was hard to find fault with really any of their moves. All of them got rid of players that were probably at the end of their rope with those respective teams. So the guys they got rid of made sense to get rid of, and the guys they brought in, replace, if not exceed, that talent that walked out the door, I think, for the most part. So it's going to be really fun to see how this division shakes out this next season. With respect to the Bears, I think they're probably, and the Vikings, I guess, the Vikings probably aren't ready to quite make the playoffs with the changes they made at quarterback specifically, but Packers, Lions should probably battle it out for the top of the division. And then I do think the Vikings and Bears are going to be very, very scary teams to play, specifically if you're trying to make a playoff game, or specifically if you're trying to make the playoffs late in the season and you have to run into them in like week 15, 16. I don't know if I'd want to play the Vikings or Bears when they're that far into the season with this young talent. So yeah, unless you
think the Vikings could be a wild card team.
Really? Okay. Well, that'll be for a new video or a different video later on in this off season. So be on the lookout for potential division predictions later on this off season, probably a couple months down the line. But yeah, unless you got anything else, Aaron, I think that'll do it for this episode of the most unprofessional sports channel on YouTube, Swivel Chair Sports. I've been your host, Zach Circumwork with my coach today, Aaron. Go and say bye, Aaron.
Bye.
All right. Really want to thank you for watching. If you made it this far, make sure to leave a like, maybe subscribe if you haven't. But other than that, Have a good day. Deuces.